Jonathan Ehrlich, who is right here with us from Hayden in New Zealand. Jonathan is a fiery soul, such an artist, and is a vibrant soul that can, I think, basically initiate so many things just by the power of his heart, his perception of the world, and the way also he can buzz life into thought forms, whether they are pieces of art or music or writings or initiatory arts, and the way he can hold the group space. So, brother, I'm really thrilled to receive you. Would you speak a little bit about what is Soul of Earth and what would be the revolution ahead for you?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Just testing this to see if I'm good.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really great to be here. And I feel like, on a personal level, yeah, just to speak to th this event as well, me and Olivier have spent so many calls online, um, for many years cultivating so much magic and so much in the ethers and in the inner world. So to actually feel, yeah, something that I know for you has been a seed of your dreaming and your magic and your love for so long, and seeing it come to life and just feeling you own the land over there is just incredible, and feels like, yeah, a miracle witnessing it from over here on this part of the earth. So yeah, I feel really grateful to just see the magic flower and manifest. Yeah, and to speak into revolution for me, I think for a long time I've come from a background of a lot of creativity, and what started off as learning guitar from my dad, and loving good literature, and being and as American growing up, and being so drawn to Bob Dylan when I was playing guitar. And I think something in me always, no matter what I was doing, or even when I was younger and pursuing filmmaking and theater and university, there was always this part of me and this instinct that I think felt that this is not this fire of creativity that might belong, or seemingly belong, to certain individuals, such as Bob Dylan, who might write songs and write poetry, and might speak the things or sing the things, or create the things that are vibrating some note of universality that, so many people in the audience are feeling or thinking. There was always a part of me that quality of creativity that felt like it's able to come through the cracks of civilization and speak the things that are unspoken. I always had the sense of that thing is something that is just inherent in our nature. So even if someone thinks they're not creative, or witnesses another who appears creative, but they don't think they are creative, for me, I see an inherent link between crisis and creativity. And I feel like a lot of the crisis happening in the world, from my kind of esoteric perspective or soul perspective, I feel like is really a crisis between the inner worlds and the outer worlds. And yeah, and living in times for a very long time now, where when someone's moving through emotional crisis, or what we've been taught and conditioned to construct the perfect life, when that starts to fall apart, for me, revolution is when we remember the creative rites of passage that are happening on a soul level. And when those rites of passage around remembering that there's something really beautiful blooming inside of someone, that when they're going through crisis, or when a relationship breaks down, or there's phases of addiction, when all these different forms of crisis are happening, that can often be very personal, or can often be pathologized. For me, the soul revolution is when everything that we know we are on the inside starts to come out on the outside. And actually, my feelings, we're entering a time now where the days of, yeah, new ideas, and looking at the different organs of culture, such as the environment and education and the justice system, and the economy. For me, the soul revolution is really when people start to express who they are from the inside out, that almost in the moment of crisis and disillusionment and not knowing who, I constructed this life and now I don't know who I am anymore. And even if I'm feeling more and more separate from people in my life, I feel like that's a very specific rite of passage that's underway right now around remembering that there is a deep intelligence in terms of what's happening in our inner life. And so, that there's been people throughout time, and Rudolf Steiner is one who comes up a lot for me, who's often known for the schools that he's created, and that way of teaching and that way of being, of really harnessing the inner life, of a child, a lot of what you guys are doing there, and actually nourishing the seed, or that bit that James Hillman would call the acorn theory, where we actually just keep focusing on the inner seed and on the inner life, as opposed to focusing on any sort of linear path of who we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to do. So yeah, I feel like we're at a time where, as people go through crisis and and are being handed some sort of creative revelation on the other side, I feel like this is really what's brewing in terms of new leadership, that it's human beings who've been through specific fires and specific vulnerable thresholds in their life. And and I think a core piece of this for me is that, what inspired this name that, that we were talking about years ago, of Soul of Earth, or SOE, came from the same letters of this SOE in World War II, Special Operations Executive. And I think you were the first. I think you were the first person that introduced me to this, and it just started flooding my creative world, and realizing, okay, there was this underground operation in World War II where, I think there was maybe 13, 14,000 people, and all sorts of people from different classes, that ex-criminals, men, women, who were going about their lives basically as double agents, and waging the war, fighting the war underground. And a lot of people didn't even know who they were. A lot of them, they didn't know who each other were for a lot of those years in the mid 20th century. And so in a way, I feel like those times in history when people are forced to kind of find their agency inside and rise up, often because there's an outer crisis, or because there's literally a battle or a war happening on the outside. I feel like now we're kind of in a World War III, that I think on one layer, of course, there's many outer crises and wars happening in the world, but I feel like the real crux now is the battlefield that's almost happening in the psyche of humanity, where the pieces of our own survival that have really been driving who we are, and aspirations, and looking at so many ways that the systems that we were meant to put lots of trust and faith into are now breaking. How does that breaking actually start with the individuals? So any new idea or anything that would come out of us could really only happen from, accepting the current culture breaking and collapsing inside of us, and then from that place, seeing what wild creative act wants to come through. So yeah, I'll just pause there for a moment, but I feel like those are some of the threads of how revolution, yeah, feels for me this day and age.
Thank you so much, brother. It feels so immensely alive in you. It's also immensely alive since the beginning of the transition, I feel. We had, for example, 2 days ago and even yesterday, Rob Hopkins really advocating a sort of intense uh, calling in of the future through all of our creativity to match the insane intensity of the crisis we're facing. And often
Mm.
this crisis is matched with an intense fear and crystallization, and it advocates exactly the opposites. And I was just feeling like there is this switch between crystallization and dilation that is ecstatic creativity that you're speaking about. I love
Mm,
also resonates with what Rutendo and Gara was sharing with around this kind of this eventual conflict between the inner life and the outer world that was resolved in African knowledge system like Ubuntu, where everything is interrelated, and so the inner and the outer are interwoven. But we have created some kind of split in between those worlds, and
mm,
there's kind of last sentence that is also a question towards you. The last dispensation, the last civilization has been narrowing the bandwidth of humanity between the mental realms of the reason and the Renaissance and reason and meaning and so forth, and also suppressing much of our instinctual and bodily sensations. So basically to react to such a crisis and adaptation needed, we have such a narrow bandwidth between basically a few emotions and the mind. How, in your sense, can we reopen and re-verticalize our being to be connected to greater forces, so to let them pass through us?
mm. Yeah, that's a good question. Mm,
Because I'm sensing basically this posture of SOE that we just discovered
mm,
ourselves of Earth makes so much sense to merge all these processes that passing through us. And at one
yeah.
moment, it felt, oh, this already existed, and it was this sort of agency to liberate the
Mm,
world and Europe, especially from the fascism and from Hitler, and so right. So it was basically
mm,
acting undercover, but with such determination, a willful creativity that was to reinvent life from the inside out, and as yeast in the bread. So uh, I'm sensing there is something about how do we dilate into this crisis and emerge anew through this crisis, and this
mm,
posture of being an agent of change undercover, being as a teacher, as a lawyer, as whatever the situation, and how do we open? Would you give a few key notes of, yeah, how do we call in this creativity, this ecstatic creativity into ourselves?
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, uh, for me, I feel like the question you're asking, is that I feel like the trend in certain transformational worlds or somewhere like here, like Haydn or places where there's different workshops or trainings going on, um, this conversation's come up a bit recently of like, the real world and the soul world, or the muggles and the mystery school, or someone who goes to a transformational container and then resumes their life. So I feel like in terms of that wave, the way that I feel it and the way that I think is um, in some ways a way to actually consciously accelerate one's crisis, but also call in more support and more love in a different kind of way that one might be used to, I feel like actually has to do with as people move through different thresholds and different crises with their own initiations, that there are certain conversations and certain confrontations with reality that start to only be had with certain people to some degree. So I feel like actually there's a in a soul-based culture of initiation, it would basically mean that as someone's going through their own crisis point and something new is trying to bloom or creatively come through, the default some of the time would be to then, vulnerably reveal some of what's actually going on in one's inner world or in one's private life, say with the beings where there's been the most long-standing history with, or there's been the most emotional comfort and safety with in the outer life. But I feel like what starts to happen is that almost like from a Steiner's perspective or from a soul-based education, that something in the child actually is yearning to be seen as a soul. And so I think that in some ways, what happens when one starts to bloom in new ways creatively, and one starts to also go through different processes of old layers of the identity really beginning to fade away at the same time as something creatively is wanting to come through. It's almost like one's calling in a new sense of gaze or allies from the outside to look in and actually see that person, as a soul, as divinity, as, yeah, creativity, the one life, whatever you want to call it. And so in a way, I feel like calling in those greater forces is actually, how does that threshold look for each person when they move through a certain step inside themselves, and then actually try to find a new piece of the world that they're longing for that's not quite here, but how do they take the risk to bridge that gap with someone, or how do they take that risk to almost self-destruct a little piece of one's life or one's identity in a way that's also, comfortable, or yeah, not quite too much of an edge for the life one's already constructed, but in a way where you also know that you're kind of, yeah, chiseling a new part of the path and setting up a new point of no return for yourself as well.
Yeah, beautiful, brother. So this afternoon, even like after this transmission, we will have a land art performance led by Pietro Zucchetti and a few people here and
Mm,
invited everywhere. And one permaculture principle is actually problem is the solution. And I
mm,
feel that it's beautiful also turning around of the global crisis, like you advocate, not being a kind of something to just control and eventually try to flee away from, but something to dive into as a kind of rite of passage to call in
mm,
the future states of ourselves, our community, humanity, the planet. And I feel we live
mm,
just tremendous times to live this. And it's the posture, like is also at the base of Earth in Transition, is basically based on the as Aborigine cosmology of the dragon dreaming. And when you see a
mm,
dragon in the Australian cosmology, you don't flee for it. You just turn and face it because it's a place of the highest potential. The
mm,
dragons is the place where we can unleash the most effective, radical, and evolutionary based transformation.
mm,
So, yeah, I just feel we are all in this idea of answering also the call of life. And a
mm,
last bit here would be like we've had really last centuries really that quite about going up to the crown chakra and connecting up there. We have maybe ancient roots, like for example here the Druidic traditions and so forth that have been actually literally roots. And maybe the era to come is also an era for the principle that can merge those two direction and those two energy, which is the heart. So do you have
mm,
basically something to say about the love principle and how would be love in the coming civilization? How would be love acting through us within this soul
mm,
revolution?
mm. Yeah. Yeah, well, in a way, I feel, um, in so many ways that, like, that last part of the, when was that last part of the 18th century of, I forget the exact story, but I think France was maybe funding the American Revolutionary War or something, and Louis XVI had crazy spending, so there was this whole economic decline happening in France, and at the same time, um, just some years before, you had the Declaration of Independence signed. So in many ways, I feel like the way that I see love moving through humans is actually when the very principles that certain nations were founded on, that have to do with these words and these principles that we use, like freedom or unity and diversity. For me, the way that I see and feel love in a soul-based culture is that it's something where, yeah, where even if we're not the same as, say, a forest or an ecosystem, there's something about being able to feel how beauty and how creativity moves through one human being who's across from you, and being able to feel inspiration come through one's mind, feel an overjoy in the heart, feel one's body come alive, and actually having an enlivening experience of becoming more of oneself, because we can feel that this greater being of life is uniquely expressing through that individual in that way that would never be the way that life would express through me. And so in a sense, that's how I feel the love principle, and also what freedom and diversity really look like when they come through the heart, where we're not actually in competition. We're not, I almost see it as something where we're in conscious, loving witness of each other's blooming down to the nitty-gritty parts of our human and our wounding, as well as the preciousness of how each person's inner life and soul expresses, but not from a place of comparison, of self-judgment, of being able to track our development. I just read this quote yesterday of this great Buckminster Fuller quote of there's no caterpillar asks who thinks it's going to become a butterfly or something like that. So I feel that principle of actually being at a place where we feel the greater love and the greater cycle that we're part of throughout time and space, but actually present moment now, we can have a level of capacity of feeling the unique blooming that's happening in our own being as well as the person across from us. And so in a sense, I feel that's the value of the inner life, and that really unveiling, it's happening, but to have the inner life really fully unveiled and to have those principles land. I mean, it does feel like we're on the cusp, in some way, even if there's so much moving in the world in terms of outer crisis right now. I also feel like there's things happening at the moment where no matter how much we try to reach for the next ideal or think we'll know our way out of something, I feel like many of us are waiting for that third party to come in that makes it not just about us and our cleverness or our ideas to get us to the next phase. So yeah.
That's beautiful, brother.
Mm.
While you were sharing, I was also feeling the really peculiar role of mythology in here.
Mm.
Uh, at a previous time in between worlds and civilization, the Great Plateau was saying, create heroes. And I was just feeling basically like how much new mythology can be some kind of self-created and self-actualizing prophecies that
Mm.
will enable us to really to have the momentum to create the kind of setting and the story and the momentum so that our consciousness abides in the transformation it can barely merely comprehend. So
Mm.
have you a few words around new mythology and its role in all this?
Yeah. 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 I was just talking about this the other day. I've said this before, that in many ways I feel like there's always been a very innocent part of me that yeah, I was just sharing this with Lucas, who's here now, that and so in some ways I've always felt like every tradition, every religion, every spiritual tradition, there's always been a very innocent part of me that, is right there with the fiery revolution part, that just feels the one singular children's book of Earth, the one singular bedtime story, um, that along the way the pages just got ripped out and distributed, and a very human-centric culture came in to try to control what that story was, and then this one page became its own story, that page. But it feels like we're just getting back to the one story of Earth, really, and who we are as Earth in cosmos. And so for me, I feel like there's a place at the moment where the irony and the tragedy is that I feel like the split that we've been quite good at for such a long time between the private and the public life, that we're living two separate stories so much of the time. And many opinions and vantage points around that duality and all of that. But I feel like for me, the revolution of mythology actually has to do with each person choosing to bridge that gap between the inner life and the outer life, the public life and the private life. And so I think the irony is that when we start to collapse those things, the places where we think we'd be alone or that we'd be broke or wouldn't find others or wouldn't find community, that one universal tale of who we are and that remembering that I feel really happens through the heart um, starts to reveal the new myth and the new mythology. So in many ways, I feel like part of the emergency and the crisis, I'd say, is like let's actually tell the true story about who we are, about starting with ourselves, starting with the bridge, the gap between the public life and the private life, and risk the vulnerability of sharing our own madness, sharing our own shame, the things that we keep here in this drawer, but we won't really share with that person. There's a huge survival terror and crisis around our privacy and our private life and our public life. And yet, from a soul perspective, we're all one and there are no veils. But I think that the stories that we're longing to be told are the ones that are trying to actually be born through us, the more we just unveil and come out of hiding. So I feel that, if I could ignite a fire in the world right now in certain ways, I feel like it's every time we go to I don't know, sit around a campfire or go to a theater performance or go to the films, the cinemas, if we're going to be told a story that brings about something universal inside of us, how can we bring out that note of universality in our own backyards? When people hear the words, I think it was Martin Shaw who would say this, that there's nothing more universal when we sit around the fire and we hear someone say once upon a time, because it just brings us out of ourselves. It brings us into a place that's not me in my whatever, so how we come closer and closer to that impulse around once upon a time, we're brought into a place of the eternal, the timeless, but then when push comes to shove, we often don't want to break out of the now and this linear time space moment we're in. So I think going back to the beginning, that one of the biggest points of madness, I think, with us as a species is that we think that the artist belongs to certain people. We think it's still viewed that creativity, and yeah, maybe he can draw or I play guitar or he does drums or whatever, but I feel like when we get out of ourselves and we take the risk to tell a different story than the skin that we're wearing, and particularly take that risk with someone who we don't even know or someone who we feel like it might be risky, usually that's the place where new mythology starts to come. And so it's kind of funny that the disillusionment of our own identity and the places where we're so afraid of our lives breaking down, it's in that place where actually we're becoming very good storytellers because something true is actually arriving. So so yeah, I feel in there is a beautiful yeah, is a beautiful point of risk and revolution.
And I'm grateful because I think since yesterday
Mm,
we've been feeling this kind of really evident, simple, but so potent and effective magic, which are words. And you just shared once upon a time. And I feel that's
mm,
an extraordinary magic formula. These are
mm,
like Earth in Transition has been about can we speak the words that regenerate? And I think once upon a time are such words. I also
mm,
feel that yesterday and the day before we had Rob Hopkins with those two simple words, what if? And they are
mm,
basically invitation to welcome back at the core of our lives the mystery. Because when we hear once upon a time and when we hear what if, we forget about the rationality that humanity itself recognized as being such a limited tool Henry Simon received actually the Nobel Prize for this and limited rationality. But we
mm,
don't have that much tools to enable our imaginary, our inner child principle to bloom in its creative action. And once upon a
mm,
time, what if I maybe among the few magic formula to call this power in? So thank you
Mm.
so much for inviting it.
mm, mm,
Yeah.
Once upon a time in Saint Claude, there was a temple being built.
Yeah.
mm.
So this beautiful invitation also to dedicate spaces to this reinvention, regeneration of cultural civilization landscape, our
Mm,
sense of humanity.
mm,
Uh,
mm,
that we can call temples, mystery schools. So yesterday, indeed, we were in such a place, and I love
mm,
also like in Urban Transition, has been this beyond words evening of meditation on the solstice in the cave and so
Mm.
forth. And we are
mm,
right now surrounded by kids and people working on the syntropic lines and French activist movement, Oxfam and Cyclotour are reinventing things around water management in this nation.
mm,
I just feel how beautiful it is to have at the same time this kind of aura of really really radical reinvention at the core of our humanness, and also this note of externalization and how can this
mm,
land into forms without having a sort of gap that eventually was there in former civilization or whatever between an initiated humanity and the rest of humanity or something, how all this can become what Ken Wilber was calling a great chain of being. And I think
mm,
here also the power of imaginary, the power of imagination and the stories, etc., is the lores. You often speak about lores that can unite the
mm,
whole of humanity into a few notes, a few
mm,
elements of the world. So, do you have something to say about how do we somehow externalize such a soul culture?
mm. Yeah. Yeah, well, lore, I mean, it's interesting because lore, tr- like traditionally, lore was word of mouth, and the word of mouth came first, and then it was writing. So I feel in some way, because inherently, and this is said so much in different traditions in their own way, but because if in fact the soul is group conscious and not individual conscious, then part of the lore and part of the myth, I feel, actually really has to do with how each person finds their own creative capacity into something a little more group conscious, and then how that is shared with others. So in a way, someone, yeah, I feel like someone being able to tune into their community or tune into their nation or tune into a land that matters to them, how we exactly go to that place of once upon a time and actually turn toward a greater being that we're part of, and to put that first, I think is a really important piece of the whole soul revolution thing. So I think often it's usually COVID or the civil rights movement or something will come in a form of outer crisis that'll then bring people together, and and inherently will find that sense of, okay, there's something that binds us, but how each person, I mean, two things. I feel like how each person, how we reveal who we actually are from the inside out, and in doing that, spend time with each other, even strangers, even when we're at a bookshop or the grocery store or something. I feel there's a quality inherently inside of us that we're constantly um kind of pretending like we don't have, which is the ability to just see each other as souls, to hold the gaze with someone a little bit longer. And I feel like when we're risking the intimacy of bringing our inner worlds out to the outer world, then we're confirming that another story exists. So I feel that's the piece that I feel is so crucial and so important because, we're all very passionate people and can talk about different things but
Yes. Is it there?
I think they both froze.
Yes.
oh, can you hear me?
Is it the first time it freezes or I don't, okay.
Can you hear me?
We lost you.
Yeah, we lost you for the last
Oh,
minute. Sorry, bro.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel there's a funny dynamic that plays out where because we're so used to being in a culture of form that the longing we can be listening to someone speak about something we know they're passionate about, but that longing of our inner life to want to actually really know that quality specifically uniquely in that person. I feel there's kind of a summoning out of one's true nature that happens beneath the words and beneath what we're sharing about, even where we just want to see each other bloom and grow as souls. So I feel like in a way, when someone decides to emerge a little bit more and reveal a bit more of their inner worlds, really moving toward more and more what we hold sacred, then that starts to really tell the story of who we are and what we're alive for. And so in many ways, I feel like those are the new conversations, hopefully, instead of like, how are you and how's the weather and what do you do for a living? Being able to vibrate and tune in to like what is so fucking sacred to you that you would that just breaks your heart open, or what are the things that just matter so much to you that you would die for, and getting to the chase more with each other, I feel is so essential because whether I'm crazy or not, um it's hard to not assume that when something like COVID comes, I know for me, it's when the outer storm comes and then it leaves and then we kind of resume life as normal. I feel like it's in our nature to actually, on one hand, want to stay stable in what we know, and then there's another part that wants the next wave to come, that wants the next thing to come, that shakes us out of our boxes. But for me, the real vulnerable thing around now is that well, maybe we don't need to wait for the next crisis. Maybe the next crisis is actually what's already happening inside of us that actually needs a very loving community, even if it's one or two people, where we're not going to bullshit each other and we're going to actually consent to breaking down, to moving through the next gate of the unknown with each other. And, in a way, just going on a slight tangent, but in a way, I feel like in many ways, one of the only really old, quite beautiful group conscious beings that exists, I think, in the world are like the 12-step programs, because they're actually places where people come when they're in crisis, and oftentimes that person is a bit pathologized by the people around them who care about them because they're self-destroying. But from another perspective, if we lived in a culture that honored the soul, where these rites of passages and ceremonies were fully here, we'd be celebrating when someone's in crisis, and the whole community would just stop what they're doing to gather around that person and remind them that they're going through such a beautiful moment in their cocoon, and the tribe would gather because some creative note of this person that they don't even know, that we don't even
Really
know,
much though.
is
I like that. He's holding the earth.
yeah, that we're holding out for it, and supporting them and loving them in that process, and you know encouraging the self-destruction and holding that person on the other side when they pass through. Did I freeze again? It might be their end, eh? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they dropped out.
Popped out. Oh, well.
Interesting. All right, maybe that's that then. Hmm.
Still live on Facebook.
It's live on Facebook.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm.
Oh yeah. Hey, hey. Can you hear me? Oh, I think you're muted.
Take off.
We back. Sorry, I don't know.
It's
Little.
okay.
Okay.
Wonderful image of you like this, like
Holding
holding the
the
earth, holding the air.
No, bro. What I was feeling is basically this kind of virus of authenticity and letting the inner worlds out, and this intimacy from
Mm.
soul to soul that you invite. I was
Yeah.
feeling a kind of viral thing in times of crisis, and I was feeling that maybe eventually sort of agency, or this kind of what it is to be an agent within Soul of Earth imaginary. So is it
Hmm.
somehow related? How do you feel about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I feel like this is kind of the next step in a way, you know? Yeah.
And while I was feeling like this kind of viral intimacy of just having this soul to soul relationship with each other, which feels like
Mm.
somehow evolutionary in our way to behave as one humanity or one community. I feel there
Mm.
is also a kind of drastic and more radical way of evolution that somehow is being prophetized in many mythology, theology. Could be we speak about revelation of apocalypse or whatever. And I have
Mm.
this image of Kubrick representation of the monolith in 2001. You know, there's this kind of monadic or divinity presence in the human realm that just make a huge radical switch or
Mm.
initiation. And I'm just wondering how the two eventually go hand in hand, this kind of radical change of degree in our in the way we are, and how can this also become some sort of mycelium evolutionary initiation. So how
Mm.
can you speak a little bit about this kind of two ways to see initiation?
Yeah. 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 Well, you know, in a way, I feel that image, yeah, that famous image in 2001, is quite fascinating because in a way you're having, yeah, something so primal, you know, you're having a very, I mean, in some ways, yeah, a very early stage of our evolution, you know, worshiping something that is, yeah, a pure spirit or monadic technology or something that looks like it could, you know, be light years ahead in the future. So in a way, the way that I see those two things working together is yeah, kind of that line. I think Bruce references this a lot of Einstein's thing of like, you know, if there's going to be a religion, it's going to be a cosmic religion. And I feel that with that image that for me the piece that in my heart feels the most vital and the most, you know, arousing right now is that is basically something like we're too far along now. We're too, yeah, things are moving along so quickly and breaking down that the days, what I feel are the days of education are done, the days of ideas are done. Um, and we're kind of like in the hamster wheel still. And so for me, I feel that what that's doing though is that it's creating momentum And that definition from the esoteric tradition of tension being focused, immovable will. It's not something that's a yeah, we might be stressed or it might have to do with the nerves or the emotions, but it's focused, immovable will. And so for me, what a time of extreme polarity and the fight for different forms of freedom, for different layers of the identity, and all those issues piling up, as I feel it's generating a very ripe creative process. So through specific cracks and through specific moments of ripening, specific acts of creativity are being called upon. And in a way, I see that monolith as those moments where something comes through, and I can feel a viral image of, like, as I say, the black hole cult, or something that's just happening, that just is, that that is not just an idea, it's a revelation that's genuinely occurring. And I feel like the monolith I see as somewhere where human creativity and the vibrancy of the human spirit also meets the current revelations that are happening scientifically, that are happening spiritually. So all of that's just kind of converging. And then we have the opportunity to, create new deities or create new monoliths, things that we already know are true, that we can't help but surrender to and worship, because they're actually emerging through us, because we know that we are it, and or at least a part of it. So in a way, I feel there's a form of creativity that I feel almost has a formal training, and I think it's also a kind of training that's impossible, because it feels like the real cocktail to that ingredient of creativity is each person's unique crisis points, and how they emerge as an artist during that time. So actually, the vibration of their own crisis, of their own vulnerability, is coming through in physical form. And there's a healthy trickster energy that actually comes forth and breaks through a specific opening and a crack. And I think that's where the same impulse of the teenager comes, to want to vandalize or run around a town and spray paint the walls. It's something that is actually penetrating into the cracks of civilization, but doing it from a place of one's own breakdown. And even in that place, which I feel is really a no mind state, we're creating something, say it's graffiti art, or a symbol or something, and it's speaking to the universal. So I think my dream of something viral taking off is that when other people see those creations, or see those monoliths, or see those things spray painted on the wall, it goes it seeps through in a way subliminally. And so whatever crisis is underway in that person who's just the spectator, that they can't help but also be hit by it, and be penetrated by it. So their crisis is also accelerated. So yeah, for me, the virus is really just the emergence of humanity as a cosmic artist. And I feel also getting clear when those parts start to take over, being, can you hear me?
It's good.
Okay. Yeah, also
Yeah.
also being able to be clear, like, in our local communities, how how everyone's emergence is going. So if the really honest conversations aren't happening around where we're at in terms of different stages of our own crisis, of our own breakdown, I feel that's such an essential building block of love and community in a culture of initiation, where we're also starting to consciously become aware of crisis and power and creativity, how it's moving through groups of people in a hierarchical way. So actually, we can then turn to people who've been through certain doors that we maybe haven't gone through, or we can feel that there are others coming in places that we have been through. And so actual conversations that almost, is kind of like a parallel to the 12-step programs when someone sees someone going through a very specific crisis, and maybe that person is even a better person to talk to because that person is also a parent, versus someone who's not, and they see specifically something happening with them emotionally that they remember, oh yeah, I went through that, and they also remember some beautiful piece of art that came through them at that time. So I feel like a lot of those conversations that start to get very specific and really start to address the intelligence of people's crises is also such an important kind of network of love within the within the creative agents emerging as well.
Thank you, brother. I feel we're getting close to the moment to wrap up, and I just read that you somehow you call in another magical formula. So we had Once Upon a Time with you, we had What If with Rob Hopkins, and there's something that my heart wishes to say for some minutes now. I love you. And I feel it's not a cliche, it's a magical formula that can also change the world. So I wanted to express that to you. I want to say the last symbol eventually is like, I feel like all of that you shared, Steiner, Einstein, etc., Kubrick, we've been prepared to conceive things that that can now eventually land as a stable experience from where really our human experience streams forth, and that is actually what we live. And it feels like this kind of merging of mythology, ecology, history, science, art, everything being in one place. I feel it's a beautiful indication that we're in a time in between worlds. Like if we were taking this beautiful Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon cover, where we have all the rays going into this one light, and we know that later on this one light will once again diffract into many rays and in different organs of civilization. But it feels like we are right now eventually beginning to touch upon something that is ever present and dawning at the same time. And I'm just like thrilled that we are all together here to try to fill into this. So I would love to invite any question, any reflection, whether online or here.
I just wanted to say about that I got tears in my eyes yesterday when Rob was talking about the storytelling, and it was the same with you. And now, Jonathan, we were talking about the storytelling, and it feels like and with the Once Upon a Time, it was even more somehow coming together with Rob's yesterday, what he was talking about. If also Once Upon a Time in the future, like the same time, and that's how it feels that there's something of also it's in between times and timeless, and also that the storytelling part, that there's something that it really touches something innocent and ageless, and at a part in me, and yeah, there's just this immense imagination and this immense creativity that we hold as a humanity, that's actually that the earth already holds, and we're just an expression of that. And somehow the word storytelling for me opens up that lid, that treasure box of all that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And maybe to add to that, so it's like I said, that once upon a time there's temple being built, but you could actually start from the time when temple is being in service, like to create the myth of your own with this once upon a time, and then create a myth that you want to create, and put the intention there, what kind of culture and what kind of civilization you want to create, and then like somehow breathe that into life, so it starts to take form in the coming years.
I feel also the way you let us envision a sort of future for spirituality that felt so natural, simple, and deep. And it feels like devoid of many sophistication of the last dispensation, but it feels also so much in tune with the elements, and so much I feel resonating with what Lieutenant Ngara just shared about this kind of elemental magic and this interconnectedness of the whole. And yeah, it's also, I think, leading to some beautiful bridge to what's next and the land art performance, because the land art performance is basically also, I think, something that merges the spaces between the inner and the outer. And it's also like arriving, like permacultural design in my sense is like arriving someplace, receiving an image of the future from that space, and then going back into the present to manifest with our hands and feet, like the Rubrish would say, manifesting the beauty in the present and in the density. And I feel such a beautiful time traveler and also space traveler in this earth that is about city, right? It is about also not escaping towards a paradise somewhere else or in another dimension, but bringing down heaven on earth. And so that will be one of the intents of the land art performance just afterwards. So I'm welcoming here in the space Sebastian Kitchen. Sebastian, do you hear us?